Sarah Martinez stared at the cream-colored invitation in her hands, reading the gold lettering for the fifth time that morning. Lincoln High School Class of 2014, 10-year reunion. The elegant script seemed to mock her as memories of high school flooded back like an unwelcome tide. She remembered being the girl who ate lunch alone in the library, the one whose second-hand clothes never quite fit right, whose shoes had holes she tried to hide with black marker. While other kids drove to school in their parents' cars, Sarah walked 3 miles each way, often arriving with wet feet when it rained because her shoes weren't waterproof. Her mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the hospital as a janitor, coming home exhausted every night with cleaning solutions still clinging to her hands. Her father had left when Sarah was 12, taking with him any hope of stability their small family had managed to build. The trailer they lived in on the outskirts of town leaked when it rained, and the heating barely worked in winter. At school, Sarah was invisible to most and a target to others. Jessica Williams, the undisputed queen of Lincoln High, made sure Sarah knew exactly where she stood in the social hierarchy. Jessica's father owned half the businesses in town, and her mother was on every charity board that mattered. Jessica wore designer clothes like armor and wielded her popularity like a weapon. Sarah could still hear Jessica's voice echoing through the hallways. "Look, it's Salvation Army, Sarah. Did you fish that outfit out of someone's garbage?" The laughter that followed always stung worse than the words themselves. Jessica's followers, Madison and Brittany, would giggle on cue, their perfectly manicured fingers pointing as they whispered behind their hands. The worst incident happened during junior year. Sarah had been working on a science project about renewable energy, staying after school in the empty lab because she didn't have a computer at home. She'd spent weeks gathering materials from junkyards and thrift stores, building a small wind turbine that actually worked. She was proud of it, maybe the first thing she'd been genuinely proud of in years. Jessica and her crew had found her there that evening, probably looking for a classroom to skip detention. "What's this supposed to be?" Jessica had asked, picking up Sarah's carefully constructed turbine. "Some kind of trash sculpture?" "It's for the science fair," Sarah had said quietly, trying to take it back. "The science fair?" Madison had laughed. "They're letting anyone enter now?" What happened next still made Sarah's chest tighten with remembered humiliation. Jessica had pretended to examine the project more closely, asking questions that seemed almost genuine. For a moment, Sarah had dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she was finally being seen as something more than a target. Then, Jessica had smiled that cold, perfect smile and dropped the turbine. It shattered on the floor, weeks of work reduced to scattered pieces of plastic and metal. "Oops," Jessica had said, not sounding sorry at all. "Guess it wasn't very well made." Sarah had gotten on her hands and knees, gathering the broken pieces while the 3 girls watched. No one helped. No one apologized. They just left her there in the empty classroom with her destroyed dreams and the bitter taste of tears she refused to let fall until they were gone. The science teacher, Mr. Peterson, had found her there an hour later. He'd helped her salvage what they could, and even submitted her broken project to the fair. It didn't win anything, but he'd told her it showed real promise. That small kindness had kept her going when everything else felt hopeless. Now, 10 years later, Sarah stood in her small apartment in Denver, far from the town that had never felt like home. The invitation felt heavy in her hands, weighted with all those old memories. She'd built a new life here, one that Jessica Williams and her followers knew nothing about. After high school, while her classmates went off to expensive colleges, Sarah had enlisted in the Army. She'd told herself it was for the college benefits, but really, she just needed to get as far away as possible. Basic training had been brutal, but nothing compared to the psychological warfare of high school hallways. The Army had seen something in her that Lincoln High never had. Her instructors noticed her attention to detail, her ability to stay calm under pressure, her natural leadership skills that had been buried under years of ridicule. She'd excelled in training, particularly in aviation mechanics, spending her days working on helicopters and learning everything she could about flight systems. Her first deployment had been to Afghanistan, where she'd worked as part of a helicopter maintenance crew. The work was dangerous and demanding, but, for the first time in her life, she felt valued. Her fellow soldiers didn't care about her high school reputation or her family's financial struggles. They cared about whether she could do her job, and she could do it better than most. During her second tour, something had shifted inside her. She'd started taking night classes online, working toward her degree in aerospace engineering. The same mind that had built a working wind turbine from scraps began diving deep into complex mathematical equations and engineering principles. Her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, had noticed her dedication. "You've got real potential, Martinez," he'd said one evening as they worked late on a Black Hawk that had taken damage during a rescue mission. "Have you ever thought about flight school?" Flight school. The idea had seemed impossible at first. Kids from broken homes in small towns didn't become pilots. But Captain Rodriguez had seen something she couldn't see in herself yet. He'd helped her with the application, written recommendation letters, and pushed her to believe she deserved more than she'd been told she was worth. The training had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. 18 months of intensive study, physical conditioning, and flight training that pushed her to her absolute limits. She'd failed tests, crashed in simulators, and spent countless nights wondering if she was fooling herself. But she'd also discovered something about herself that no amount of high school bullying could take away: she was a natural pilot. When she was in the cockpit, everything else fell away. The fear, the self-doubt, the voices telling her she didn't belong, none of it mattered when she was flying. She'd graduated third in her class and been assigned to fly Apache helicopters, one of the most advanced and challenging aircraft in the Army's fleet. The same girl who'd been mocked for building things from junk was now trusted with multi-million-dollar military equipment. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the Denver skyline, thinking about the path that had brought her here. After completing her military service, she'd been recruited by a private aerospace company. Her combination of real-world experience and formal training made her valuable in ways her 18-year-old self could never have imagined. She now worked as a test pilot and consultant, flying experimental aircraft and helping design the next generation of helicopters. Her apartment was modest but comfortable, filled with flight manuals and engineering textbooks. On the wall hung her pilot's wings and a photo of her standing next to her Apache, helmet under her arm, finally, looking like she belonged somewhere. The invitation was still in her hands. Part of her wanted to throw it away and pretend Lincoln High School had never existed. But another part, the part that had survived Jessica Williams and found her own way in the world, was curious about what had become of the people who'd made her feel so small. She'd heard bits and pieces over the years through social media. Jessica had married well, some investment banker from the city, and seemed to spend her time posting pictures of expensive vacations and charity galas. Madison was selling real estate in their hometown, still using her high school photos on her business cards. Brittany had gotten divorced twice and was working as a receptionist at her father's dental practice. Sarah realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being angry with them. The hurt was still there, probably always would be, but the rage that had fueled her through those first years in the Army had faded into something more like pity. They'd peaked in high school, and she was just getting started. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Mija, did you get the invitation? Are you going to go?" Elena had always encouraged Sarah to be proud of what she'd accomplished. She'd driven 8 hours to watch Sarah's graduation from flight school, tears streaming down her face as her daughter received her wings. She'd been the only family member there, but she'd cheered loud enough for an entire family. "I don't know, Mom," Sarah texted back. "It feels like opening old wounds." "You're not the same girl who left that place," Elena replied immediately. Maybe it's time they knew that. Sarah set the invitation on her kitchen counter and made herself a cup of coffee, thinking about her mother's words. She wasn't the same girl who'd left Lincoln High. That girl had been broken, convinced she was worth nothing more than the cruelest things people said about her. This woman had flown combat missions, earned an engineering degree, and built a career that her teenage self couldn't have dreamed of. Over the next few days, the invitation seemed to call to her from the counter. She found herself thinking about Mr. Peterson, wondering if he was still teaching, still helping kids like her believe in themselves when no one else would. She thought about the janitor, Mr. William, who'd always nodded hello and never looked at her with pity despite her obvious poverty. She thought about Maria, the girl who'd sat next to her in English class and sometimes shared her lunch when Sarah pretended she wasn't hungry. Maybe the reunion wasn't about Jessica Williams and her crew. Maybe it was about the people who'd shown her small kindnesses in a place that had felt so unkind. Maybe it was about showing that girl who'd picked up the pieces of her broken science project that everything had turned out okay. On Friday evening, after a particularly successful test flight of a new helicopter prototype, Sarah made her decision. She RSVP'd to the reunion, marking attending with a firm hand. She didn't know what she would say to Jessica and the others, didn't know how she would feel walking back into that gym where she'd been so miserable. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was no longer afraid of them. She'd faced down enemy fire and landed helicopters in impossible conditions. She could handle a high school reunion. As she sealed the response card in its envelope, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: excitement. For the first time in her life, she was looking forward to going home. Not because she thought it would be easy, but because she finally knew who she was. And that was something no amount of high school cruelty could take away from her. The girl who'd once hidden in the library was gone. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect in one of the most challenging professions in the world. Sarah Martinez was ready to go home and show them exactly what the school underdog had become. She had no idea that this reunion would become something far more dramatic than she could ever imagine, or that the skills she'd learned in the cockpit would soon be put to use in a way that would change everything forever. All she knew was that she was finally ready to face her past with her head held high. The invitation might have been meant as another form of ridicule, but Sarah was about to turn it into something else entirely: a chance to show them all who she really was. The hotel room in her hometown felt smaller than Sarah remembered hotel rooms being. She'd driven down from Denver that morning, taking her time on the familiar roads that led back to Lincoln. The landscape hadn't changed much: rolling hills dotted with farmhouses, the same gas station she'd walked past on cold mornings when she couldn't afford bus fare. She'd checked into the Hampton Inn on the edge of town, the nicest hotel available. It felt strange to be able to afford a decent room, to not worry about the cost of a meal or whether her credit card would be declined. The teenage Sarah who'd counted quarters for lunch money would have been amazed by the woman who could now book a weekend getaway without checking her bank balance first. The reunion was scheduled for Saturday evening, but Sarah had arrived Friday to give herself time to adjust, maybe drive past some of her old haunts. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to do this psychological preparation, but something told her it was important to see these places through her adult eyes before facing her former classmates. Her first stop was Lincoln High School itself. The building looked exactly the same from the outside: red brick, those tall windows that never seemed to let in enough light, the flagpole where she'd stood every morning waiting for the first bell. The parking lot where she'd never had a car to park was now filled with summer school vehicles and maintenance trucks. Sarah sat in her rental car, a nice silver sedan that felt like armor compared to the school buses, and walked distances of her past, and stared at the building that had shaped so much of her identity. It seemed smaller now, less imposing. The walls that had felt like prison barriers at 17 now looked like what they were: just walls around classrooms where teenagers learned and teachers tried their best to prepare them for the world. She thought about walking inside, maybe finding Mr. Peterson if he was still there, but something held her back. She wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she drove through downtown, past the courthouse where her mother had once received assistance to pay their utility bills, past the diner where Jessica and her friends used to hang out after school, laughing about parties Sarah was never invited to. The town had grown some in the past 10 years. There were new strip malls and a Starbucks where the old hardware store used to be. But the bones of the place were the same, and so were the memories that seemed to lurk around every corner. Sarah found herself driving past the trailer park where she'd grown up. The same rust-stained mailboxes, the same cracked asphalt, the same feeling of impermanence that had made her feel like she didn't belong anywhere. Their old trailer wasn't there anymore. Her mother had told her it had been demolished after a fire a few years back. In its place was a small garden that someone in the community had planted, with sunflowers growing tall against a chain-link fence. The sight of those sunflowers hit her harder than she'd expected. They were beautiful and defiant, growing in soil that wasn't supposed to nurture anything valuable. Just like she had. That evening, she called her mother from her hotel room. Elena was working the night shift but had a few minutes to talk during her break. "How does it feel being back?" her mother asked, and Sarah could hear the gentle concern in her voice. "Strange," Sarah admitted, looking out her hotel window at the town lights. "Everything looks smaller. Even the things that used to scare me." "You've gotten bigger," Elena said simply. "Not in size, Mija. In spirit. In what you know you're worth." They talked for a few more minutes about small things: Elena's new apartment closer to the hospital, Sarah's latest project at work, the weather. Normal mother-daughter conversation that felt precious because there had been so many years when they'd barely had time for it between Elena's work schedules and Sarah's military deployments. After hanging up, Sarah spent some time reviewing the reunion details. It was being held in the high school gymnasium, the same place where she'd been required to attend pep rallies that celebrated achievements she'd never been part of. The invitation mentioned dinner, dancing, and a memorial for classmates who had died. Sarah was surprised to learn that 3 of her former classmates were gone: a car accident, cancer, and a military casualty from her own time in the service. She wondered what those 3 would think about their surviving classmates gathering to reminisce about high school, a time that had felt so important then, but probably mattered much less in the face of real adult struggles. Would they think it was silly, this need to reconnect with a shared past? Or would they understand the human desire to see how everyone's story had unfolded? Saturday morning, Sarah woke early and went for a run through the neighborhoods she'd once walked. The physical activity helped calm her nerves and gave her a chance to see more of the town. She ran past houses where her classmates had lived, including the large colonial where Jessica Williams had grown up. The house looked exactly the same: perfectly maintained lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, everything that had once made Sarah feel inadequate about her own living situation. But now she saw it differently. It was just a house. A nice house, certainly, but not a measure of human worth. Jessica's family had had money, and that had made Jessica's life easier in many ways. But it hadn't made her a better person, and it certainly hadn't guaranteed her happiness. After her run, Sarah spent time getting ready for the evening. She'd brought a simple but elegant black dress, something professional but not showy. She wasn't trying to prove anything with designer clothes or expensive jewelry. Her confidence would have to speak for itself. As she did her makeup, Sarah thought about the girl who used to hide her face behind long hair, who slouched through the hallways hoping to be invisible. That girl had been so convinced that everyone was looking at her and judging her, finding her lacking. This woman knew that most people were too busy with their own insecurities to spend much time judging others. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was probably more nervous about this reunion than she'd been about some of her combat missions. In war, the enemy was clear and the objectives were defined. At a high school reunion, the battlefield was emotional and the rules were unspoken. Around 4 in the afternoon, Sarah received a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah Martinez? This is Maria Santos. I saw your name on the reunion list. I can't believe you're coming. I've always wondered what happened to you. Can't wait to catch up tonight. Maria Santos." Sarah remembered her now, Maria Garcia back then, before marriage. The girl who'd shared her lunch and never asked questions about why Sarah sometimes didn't have food. The one who'd been kind without making a big deal about it, who'd treated her like a normal person when so few others had. Sarah texted back, "Maria. Yes, it's me. I'm looking forward to seeing you too. Thanks for always being kind back then. It meant more than you probably knew." The response came quickly, "You were going through a lot. I just tried to be a friend. I always thought you were really smart and strong, even when other people couldn't see it. I can't wait to hear about your life now." This exchange helped settle some of Sarah's nerves. Maybe the reunion wouldn't be all about reliving old hierarchies and reopening old wounds. Maybe there would be people there who remembered her humanity, not just her circumstances. As evening approached, Sarah gave herself a final look in the hotel mirror. She saw a confident woman in her late 20s, someone who had earned her place in the world through hard work and determination. Her posture was straight, military bearing that had become natural over the years. Her eyes were clear and direct, not the downcast gaze of the girl who used to walk these same streets. She grabbed her purse and car keys, taking a deep breath before heading to the door. Whatever happened tonight, she could handle it. She'd survived high school the first time when she was vulnerable and alone. She could certainly survive a reunion as a successful adult with a clear sense of her own worth. The drive to the high school took only 10 minutes, but it felt like traveling through time. With each familiar landmark, she felt layers of her adult confidence peeling away, replaced by echoes of teenage insecurity. By the time she pulled into the school parking lot, her hands were shaking slightly. The parking lot was fuller than she'd expected, with cars that ranged from modest sedans to expensive SUVs. She recognized some faces walking from their cars to the building, people who'd barely acknowledged her existence in high school but who might be curious about her now. As she walked toward the gym entrance, she could hear music and laughter coming from inside. The same sounds that had once signaled her exclusion now beckoned her forward. She paused at the door, gathering her courage, and then pushed it open. The gymnasium had been transformed with decorations in their school colors, round tables scattered across the floor where the basketball court used to be. A DJ was playing music from their high school years, songs that brought back a flood of memories, both good and painful. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the crowd. Some faces were immediately recognizable, others had changed significantly. She spotted Jessica Williams almost immediately, still beautiful, still perfectly put together, holding court at a table near the center of the room. Before she could decide whether to approach any particular group, Maria Santos appeared at her elbow. She looked almost exactly the same, just more polished and professional, with kind eyes that lit up when she saw Sarah. "I can't believe you actually came," Maria said, giving her a warm hug. "You look amazing. Confident. Different from high school, but in the best way possible." "Thanks," Sarah said, feeling some of her tension ease. "You look wonderful too. I love seeing a familiar friendly face." "Come on," Maria said, taking her arm. "Let me introduce you to some people, and you have to tell me everything about what you've been doing. I always suspected you'd end up doing something incredible." As Maria led her into the crowd, Sarah felt the first real stirrings of optimism about the evening. Maybe this wouldn't be the trial by fire she'd been expecting. Maybe, just maybe, it would be exactly what it was supposed to be, a chance to reconnect with the past and show how far she'd come. She had no idea that within a few hours, the evening would take a turn that would test everything she'd learned about courage, leadership, and who she really was underneath all the years of growth and change. For now, she was content to follow Maria into the crowd and see what the night would bring. The first hour of the reunion passed better than Sarah had dared to hope. Maria had introduced her to several classmates, and most of the conversations had been genuinely pleasant. She'd talked with Tom Bradley, who'd become a teacher, and remembered her thoughtful contributions to English class discussions. She'd caught up with Amy Chen, who was now a nurse and had always been quietly kind to everyone in school. People seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking about her time in the military and her current work. Sarah found herself relaxing, sharing stories about flight training and test piloting that made her former classmates' eyes widen with genuine admiration. For a moment, she allowed herself to think that maybe she'd built this whole thing up in her mind, that maybe everyone had simply grown up and moved past the petty cruelties of adolescence. That's when Jessica Williams noticed her. Sarah was standing near the memorial table, reading the names of their departed classmates, when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Jessica approaching, flanked by Madison and Brittany, just like old times. They all looked polished and expensive, their dresses clearly designer, their jewelry catching the gym's fluorescent lights. Well, Jessica said, her voice carrying that same sweet venom Sarah remembered so well. "Sarah Martinez. I honestly didn't think you'd show up." Sarah straightened, calling on every lesson in composure she'd learned in the military. "Hello, Jessica. Madison. Brittany. You all look well." "We weren't sure you'd even gotten the invitation," Madison added with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I mean, we didn't have a current address for you. Had to do some real detective work." The implication was clear, they'd gone out of their way to find her, and not out of kindness. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach but kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate the effort. It's been interesting seeing everyone again." "I'm sure it has," Jessica said, looking Sarah up and down appraisingly. "You know, we were just talking about you the other day. Remember that science fair project you worked so hard on? The one that, what was it that happened to it again?" Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I remember. It was a long time ago. Funny how some memories stick with you, isn't it?" Brittany chimed in. "I was just telling Jessica how we should make sure you felt welcome tonight. After all, we know how hard it can be for you to fit in." The three women shared a look that Sarah recognized from 1,000 high school interactions. They were feeding off each other's energy, building towards something. The predatory gleam in their eyes was exactly the same as it had been 10 years ago. "So tell us," Jessica said, her voice taking on that falsely interested tone, "what have you been up to all these years? We heard you joined the military. That must have been suitable for someone with your background." The word suitable was loaded with condescension, implying that military service was somehow a lesser choice, something for people who couldn't do better. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest but tamped it down. She'd dealt with hostile interrogations from actual enemies. She could handle 3 women who'd never grown past their high school mean girl phase. I served as a helicopter pilot, Sarah said simply. Did 2 tours overseas, then transitioned to civilian test piloting. A pilot? Madison seemed genuinely surprised. Really? That's so unexpected. I suppose some people just find their level, Jessica said with that razor-sharp smile. Though I have to say, you don't really look like pilot material. Aren't they usually more imposing? The comment was designed to undermine Sarah's credibility, to make her sound like she was exaggerating her accomplishments. It was the same tactic Jessica had used in high school: question everything, make the target doubt themselves, maintain superiority through verbal warfare. I think you'd be surprised what people can accomplish when they set their minds to it, Sarah replied evenly. Oh, I'm sure, Brittany said. Though sometimes people do exaggerate their achievements at these things. Remember Bobby Chin claiming he was a doctor when he was really just working at a clinic? They were calling her a liar without saying it directly, leaving room to backtrack if challenged but making their skepticism clear. Sarah felt the familiar weight of being disbelieved, of having to prove herself to people who had already decided she wasn't worth their respect. Actually, Maria Santos appeared beside them, having noticed the conversation from across the room, Sarah's being modest. I looked her up before tonight. She's a test pilot for Hawthorne Aviation Systems. They design military helicopters. Pretty impressive stuff. Jessica's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. How interesting. Though I suppose someone has to do those kinds of jobs. The dismissal was clear. Even if Sarah had achieved something significant, it was still somehow beneath Jessica's notice. Sarah realized that nothing she could have accomplished would have impressed Jessica Williams. Olympic athlete, brain surgeon, Nobel Prize winner, Jessica would have found a way to diminish any achievement that didn't match her preconceived notions about who Sarah was allowed to be. Well, Jessica continued, it's certainly been enlightening catching up. We should let you get back to whatever it is you were doing. They started to turn away, but Sarah found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Jessica. The 3 women turned back, surprised by the firmness in her voice. I want you to know something, Sarah said, her military training helping her project calm authority even while her heart raced. What you did to me in high school, the constant ridicule, the destroyed project, all of it, I forgive you. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Forgive me? I think you're being a bit dramatic. I'm not done, Sarah continued. I forgive you because I understand now that you were just kids acting badly. But I want you to know that your cruelty didn't break me. It made me stronger. Every time someone told me I wasn't good enough, I used it as fuel to prove them wrong. This is getting a bit much, Madison muttered, but Sarah could see uncertainty in her eyes. I wanted to thank you, actually, Sarah pressed on, feeling a strange sense of liberation in finally saying these words. Because if you hadn't made my life so miserable here, I might not have been so determined to build something better somewhere else. So thank you for showing me exactly who I didn't want to become. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Other conversations around them had quieted as people sensed the tension. Sarah realized she had the attention of most of the nearby tables, including several classmates who remembered the dynamics from their school days. Jessica's face was flushed now, her composure cracking for the first time. You always were delusional, Sarah. Some people just can't accept their place in the world. You're right, Sarah said with genuine calm. I couldn't accept the place you assigned me. I had to go out and earn my own. Before Jessica could respond, the reunion organizer, Mrs. Henderson, approached their group with a worried expression. She was carrying a cell phone and looked shaken. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but we've just received some concerning news from the sheriff's office. There's been a situation at the county medical center. A helicopter carrying critical patients has gone down about 20 miles north of town. The crowd had gone quiet now, everyone straining to hear the details. The helicopter was transporting patients from a serious car accident to the trauma center in Springfield, Mrs. Henderson continued. They lost radio contact about an hour ago, and emergency crews are having trouble locating them in the darkness. The terrain up there is rough, lots of hills and forest. Sarah felt her pilot instincts kicking in immediately. Her mind was already calculating flight times, weather conditions, terrain challenges. Without thinking, she stepped forward. What's the current weather situation? Any storms moving through? Mrs. Henderson looked surprised by the specific question. The sheriff mentioned some low visibility due to fog in the valley areas. How many people were on board? Sarah pressed, her voice taking on the crisp efficiency she used in emergency situations. The pilot, a nurse, and 2 critical patients from the car accident. A family, parents and their teenage daughter. Sarah's training told her that time was critical. If the helicopter had gone down an hour ago, the patient's medical conditions would be deteriorating rapidly, especially if they were critical to begin with. The crew would need immediate assistance, and every minute counted. Do they have search and rescue helicopters available? She asked. The nearest emergency helicopter is coming from 3 hours away, Mrs. Henderson replied. And visibility is too poor for safe night operations in that terrain. They're organizing ground search teams, but it could take all night to cover that much area. Sarah felt something click into place in her mind, the same certainty she'd felt in combat situations when decisive action was required. She knew what she had to do, even though it would expose her in ways she hadn't planned. I need to make a phone call, she said, already reaching for her cell phone. Sarah? Maria looked concerned. What are you thinking? But Sarah was already dialing, walking away from the group as the call connected. Hawthorne Aviation Emergency Line, this is Sandra. Sandra, this is Sarah Martinez, test pilot. Authorization code 77 Alpha 9. I need immediate access to the backup Apache that's stationed at Peterson Field. We have a civilian search and rescue emergency. Hold on, Sarah. Let me verify your clearance and check aircraft availability. Sarah paced as she waited, aware that Jessica and the others were watching her with expressions ranging from confusion to skepticism. She could almost see them wondering if this was some elaborate performance designed to impress people. Sarah? You're cleared for emergency access. The Apache is fueled and ready. What's your ETA to Peterson? 30 minutes. Send all available emergency response protocols to my tablet. And, Sandra? Contact the local sheriff and let them know we're en route to assist with the downed aircraft search. Copy that. Sending coordinates now. Be careful out there. Sarah hung up and turned back to the crowd, which had grown as word spread through the reunion. Every eye was on her, and she could see the skepticism on Jessica's face was being replaced by something else, uncertainty. I have to go, Sarah announced. There's an Apache helicopter I can use to help with the search. I might be able to cover the ground search area in a fraction of the time it would take ground crews. Wait, Tom Bradley spoke up. You're seriously going to fly a search mission? Right now? Those people don't have time to wait for backup, Sarah replied simply. I have the training and access to equipment that could save their lives. She started toward the exit, then paused and looked back at Jessica, Madison, and Brittany. Their faces showed a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been the beginning of respect. I guess you'll see exactly what kind of pilot I really am, Sarah said quietly. Wish me luck. And, with that, she was gone, leaving behind a gymnasium full of people who were just beginning to understand that the girl they'd once dismissed had become someone extraordinary. Sarah's hands were steady on the steering wheel as she raced toward Peterson Field, but her mind was calculating dozens of variables simultaneously. Night search operations in poor visibility were among the most dangerous types of flying, especially in mountainous terrain. The Apache helicopter was designed for combat, not search and rescue, but its advanced sensor systems and night vision capabilities made it the best available option for covering large areas quickly. She reached the airfield in record time, her civilian clothes stark against the military-grade equipment she was about to operate. The base security guard, alerted by her company's emergency protocols, met her.